Oh, a rising tide floats all ships. That's what we're looking for is knowledge today. The rising tide is the knowledge. I remember, I don't know about you guys, your first introduction to the signage world, but for me, it was, first time I got a car and we wanted to have stickers on the car. And so dad said, come on down to the shop and we'll make you some decals, some stickers. And we're like, well, what are you talking about? And it was the first time, you got to walk into the sign shop and you had that plotter running back and forth and cutting on the Z and the Y axis. And you're looking at all that going, wow, is that how they're made? And you watch them get weeded and then the transfer paper's put on top and, your eyes are bugging out of your head and you're like, this is so cool. I want to know more. What else do they do? And that was my first introduction to the signage world. I'm sure you guys have similar stories, but vinyl and plotters is at the home of it. It's right at the heart. I've always told people if you're going to start a sign company from scratch, the first two things is a good organizational software, and number two, a plotter and vinyl. That's what's really going to run it. So what we have today with us is we have Ritchie Daize from Arlon. He was invited and gladly accepted. Ritchie, how you doing today?
Doing great, Aaron. How are you?
Doing well. Appreciate you coming on. So you're with Arlon. How long you been with Arlon? What's the story there?
Yeah, so I started with Arlon 17 years ago. And I was doing, for maybe 3 or 4 years before that, I was doing trainings for them and traveling around doing a lot of, hands-on application training, product training. And I don't know, I think someone just, as a joke, said, yeah, you should come work for us. So that turned into reality, They gave me an offer I couldn't refuse, and I've been very happily there now. Yeah, it's been 17 years.
That's a long time. It always baffles me. How does a company like Arlon come to exist? I couldn't even imagine it. Like, okay, we're going to create vinyl with an adhesive background, and then we're going to start doing different colors and stuff. How did Arlon even come to be?
Yeah. So Arlon's been around since 1958, so 66 years and counting. Mm-hmm. But we weren't making vinyl all of those 66 years. So Arlon was a converting company making different types of tapes for different industries, not just for the graphic industry. And it turned out that somewhere in the 70s, and this is before my time, of course, or even being in the industry, but in the 70s, they started converting vinyl films into pinstripes because it was really popular. If you think back to some classic cars, pretty much everything came off the dealership lot with a stripe on it, and it used to be done in the factory, and then it became something that turned out to be a skill, and there were groups of guys running around putting pinstripes on cars. So Arlon was buying film already made and converting it into different types of stripe patterns and so on. And of course that got really popular, and the companies that we were buying the film from said, well, wait a minute, we can convert vinyl as well. Why don't we make that as well? And then vinyl became difficult for us to get our hands on. So it was either we continue with the tapes side of things, or if we really like what we're doing, we think we have a big enough market in pinstripes, we should try making vinyl ourselves. So we did. And that was at the beginning of the 80s. And by the mid 80s, we were very strong with learning how to cast, learning how to coat adhesives, and of course still converting our own films. But it turned out that the plotter, you mentioned plotters, that was kind of a mesmerizing thing when you were a kid coming in and seeing these things. And when plotters first began in the 80s, they needed wide width, wider format. Now keep in mind, we're talking, 24 inches at that time, but wider format sprocketed vinyl. And Arlon, we said, hey, we're making film for ourselves to convert. We could sell this through distribution, and we started doing that. And we had a really nice color range, and that was the sort of genesis of Arlon's product line today. But we did that with cast film, and we're successful with it. But we were a small company on the West Coast, not really well known in the industry until one of the sort of big moments for us. And it was, I think, I wasn't with Arlon then, so if I get the dates wrong a little bit, bear with me, but somewhere in the early 90s, which is when I started in the industry 32 years ago, we started converting calendered films as well. So we would coat calendered films with adhesive and liners, and start, because no one was using calendared films for pigmented colors at that time. So here was a way to have a product that was a bit of a cost saving, that you could do more turn and burn graphics with at that lower cost, and still have a color range because digital wasn't around. And so Arlon was the first, I think it was called Calon at that time, the calendared version, which kind of makes sense. And so we were the leaders in that field, and that's what really put us on the map.
Okay.
And then, you know, since then, digital printers came around in the early 2000s, and maybe a little bit before that, but got really popular then. And then we had to worry about adhesives that were repositionable because installers were now wrapping things. And then, of course, air egress, we had to come out with that. So it's been nothing but innovation after innovation. And, you know, the really fun thing right now for us is that we still have the latest innovation in low contact adhesive systems called flight technology. And there still isn't a film system like it out there that really makes it easy for installers to wrap vehicles and, you know, reposition and be able to move along at a nice clip. So that innovation still stands, and, you know, that was 5 or 6 years ago. So we haven't kept our eye off the ball, that's for sure, on trying to make sure that, you know, we're coming up with films that are going to make our sign shops, you know, more profitable and more productive.
Nice. So Arlon was pretty much a adhesives company more than it was a vinyl.
Right.
They pretty much had their hand in sticky, so to speak, and they knew the sticky side of it, and then they went into the vinyl side of it later on.
That's right.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Exactly.
All right, so you touched on Calendered, and I got to ask this for all the listeners, and even for myself. I always like a re-education here. What is the difference between cast and calendared?
That's an excellent question. And there's a bit of a myth built around it, actually. So I want to tell you just a really quick story about my education on the differences between cast and calendared films. And I've always thought of a calendared film as less than. You know, it has typically a lower service life. Mm-hmm. And it has some limitations in what you can apply it to, and how long it's going to last. So again, and oh, by the way, it's typically a lower cost film as well. So you add all that up and you say, well, it must be a less than film. And I don't know, maybe it was 10 or so years ago, I got a chance to tour a facility that calendars film. So we cast our own film, and we compound and build it right from, you know, powder up to what you buy, and adhesives as well. But when it comes to calendaring film, the equipment is very large and very fast. So you really none of the brands, I don't know, maybe there are some that do, but most of us don't calendar our own film. So I went and got a chance to go through a calendaring mill.
Okay.
And after watching the process, which I'll get into in just a moment, I said to the gentleman that was the CEO of that facility, I said, hey, why in the world don't you guys just, you know, use better ingredients? Because you're making this film way faster than we can. And, you know, if you just use better ingredients in the film, it might cost a bit more. But, man, I don't want to tell him he could eat our lunch, but it almost seemed like they could. And he looked at me with like this look of disbelief, and he says, we do. You know, our calendared film, we call it plastisol, and when we cast, we call it organosol. But this plastisol that we make, the ingredients are very similar to what you guys produce as well. And so I was at a loss. Okay, well then why? What's the difference? And here's what the difference is. You can take those same types of ingredients, but when you calendar a film, you start with a very high viscosity. So you have a film a dough-like substance that almost looks like when you squirt insulation out of a can. It froths a bit like that. And that gets applied to two rollers across the top of two rollers that meet. And when those rollers pull together, now you have fused that film. You have made it into a sheet. Although it's bumpy and it's horrible and it's thick and it's not wide enough, but it's started its path on being calendared. And then you take that through another set of rollers and another set of rollers and another set of rollers. And each one of those sets of rollers refines the film to be smoother, wider, and thinner. And then eventually when you get to the end, once you've done it enough, so like for example, if Arlon's hey, we want a 3.2 mil calendered film, then they're going to have to set it through enough rollers to get it down to that thickness. And then we might say we want a satin finish. Okay, so then a couple of those last rollers are going to have a satin finish on them to make an impression on the film. And now you have satin film. Problem is, you've been pulling vinyl through that entire process. And as you pull the vinyl through the process, there's tension in it. So it's not that the vinyl is lower quality in many cases. Sometimes they do, by the way. If we want to make a promotional product that's only good for a year, of course they're going to use monomeric, polymers, and they're gonna definitely use a lower cost ingredient for something that only lasts a year. But some of the films that we're going to talk about today, they're 7-year calendered films, really high quality plastisol, but there's inherent tension in it. So of course, even 5 years from now, when the sun hits it, it's going to want to shrink a little bit. Mm-hmm. So you have to be careful where you use it. So it's about the process. So then you could ask yourself, why is calendered film cheaper if the ingredients are about the same? Okay, so everything is about time. Time is the commodity that almost all cost is based upon, right? So if you can make something 5 times faster, it's going to cost a lot less to make it. So they're able to calendar film many times faster than we can cast. So there's that process time.
So
secondly,
Sue, calendared seems amazing. That's on a process. Walk me, if you may, through the cast process now.
Sure. So when you're casting, you're starting with something that's a liquid form, and we call that organosol. Very similar ingredients, except that there are a lot of solvents in it, which help keep all of those ingredients suspended. And we take that, run it under a knife that gives a very, very specific thickness to the still liquid film, but there's a carrier sheet coming along, and that carrier sheet is moving at what we would call a line speed, many times slower than calendared, because as we run it along, we have to go through ovens. And there are many different ovens that have a lot of different zones at different temperatures. And as we flash off different solvents, we're left then with a solid behind. But we have to be clever about how we do it so that everything gets cross-linked and the liquid becomes a solid in the way we want it to. But the beautiful thing is there's no tension in it. It's been carried through the cast process. So even if you had very similar ingredients to start with, one process stretches vinyl through it at a really high speed. Also, keep in mind, calendaring doesn't have a lot of energy cost because we are having to bake off the solvents. So we have high energy cost in the ovens. And you put all of that together, and now you have 2 films that are excellent films, purposed differently, but a big cost differential in how it's made. So that's why calendared films cost less. It's not because they're less than necessarily, it's just that their process is very different.
I never had a clue. I'm going to tell you that one right now. Never had a clue how cast and I had an idea on calendar, but I had no clue on cast and how that was built. That it was a knife and a carrier, and then you're baking it, basically the solvents off to make that film. I definitely do not want to be the EPA guy that shows up at that place and tries to, do the regulations on that. But it sounds
well. But Aaron, I got to stop you. So this is what's interesting about Arlon. We do this in California, and so you can imagine how careful we need to be, which is a good thing. If we were making this in some other state where they didn't have the regulations that California has, man alive, this would be a way easier process for us. But even in LA, where we manufacture do all of our casting, the air that we let back into the into the atmosphere has to be at a certain temperature. That's pollution as well, just the temperature of the air. So there's a lot of cost that we have in making. So I would say, even though PVC isn't maybe thought of as something that's green, we make it as greenly as you possibly can.
That's impressive all in itself. I mean, I know just having the sign shop and the paint booth here in California, they show up every single time, and next thing you know, we got to go through all the files, go this, and then they always find something to find us just because they can. And so to have your whole shop here in California, that's a feat in itself. Yeah, wow, I'm really glad that you presented on that, just the cast versus counter. I had no idea those two and the differences. But yeah, I had the same premonition that it was a lower quality, cheaper, and faster, but not knowing the reasoning behind that. So yeah, I agree with you, that myth's out there. Interesting, very interesting. So you guys, I asked for the products ahead of time so I could play with some of the products and see what was going on. And I got that, got the products there, and you guys sent, let's see, you sent the 4600 and you sent the 3210 were the two products that I got to play with a little bit. And after playing with the 4600 and then calling a couple other sign shops and talking with them, saying, hey, how do you like this? You have Arlon in your shop. What's going on? And they pretty much said, Aaron, just get 4600 and call it a day, and it does it all. And I started laughing at that. I'm like, really? Like, seriously? Like, there's nothing? He goes, no, it's the workhorse. And so I came back to you and I said, okay, but before we started this podcast, I said, why is the 4600 the workhorse? And you started laughing. You're like, yeah, that's our flagship. And so I'm going to let you go off on this and just have at it, but why is the 4600 so awesome?
It's versatile. It's the product that does a lot. I don't ever want to say it does it all, because it certainly will have some limitations. But almost anything a customer could walk in the door when it comes to sign and vehicle graphics, that a customer could come in and just walk in the door and say, hey, could you do this for me? DPF 4600 is going to be able to do that. And it also comes, and there's a bit of nomenclature I should maybe go through first. So anytime that you hear Arlon, an Arlon print product, it's going to have a DPF in front of it. So it just means digital print film. So DPF 4600. The 4000 series with Arlon are generally calendered films. So 4600 is just one of the names, one of the group. But then we have GLX or MLX. So the G, of course, gloss, and then M is matte. And anytime you see an Arlon product with an X somewhere in its name, that means that it's air egress. So for those of you that don't know air egress, just think of bubble free. So if you put a bubble in a sign, you're doing an application, you just touch it with your finger, bubble goes away, you continue with your life. So 4600 is really 4600 GLX most commonly. We sell a lot of gloss.
So what you're telling me,
we have a matte
I got to stop
version.
you right there. So what you're telling me is this X is what I should have had when I first started laying vinyl, because I had a boatload of soapy water and a lot of cuss words coming out of my mouth in the early 20s when I was 20.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that, because when I began, again, 32 years ago, vinyl was just getting on rivets and things like that. And no one even, air egress, hadn't heard of anything like that. And I sure wish.
So the X.
Both
all right.
wish
So
air egress would have
that's
been around.
important for myself and for listeners, the X. Look for the X at all costs, because,
Yes.
I mean, luckily they have, different types of tables that lay vinyl down at a rapid speed, but I'm going to just say, just not even 5, 7, 10 years ago, they didn't have that, and it was soapy water, and that was a chore to lay this down. And okay, that my new love is that X right now. I'm going to tell you that one right now. The X, got it. All right, sorry. Continue on, my friend. Continue on.
So if you see an X in the name of the product, it's going to be easy to install. And the L, though, is a low profile liner. So again, we don't want to see. There are some products out there, I'm sure you can think of a couple, where you can really see the air egress pattern through the film, because they don't have low profile liners. But not every customer wants that. So with the 4600, we have a low profile liner, so you don't see that pattern. If you get, really, really close, okay, maybe you'll see something, but it's not obvious. So when we talk about it, I don't like to call it a multi-purpose product, because multi-purpose, listen, we don't want you out, fixing your your blow-up swimming pool with it. You know, this is a sign and graphic film, so it's very much purposefully designed to accept ink and to be printable, but it is a multi-surface product. So with some of our products, you can't be this versatile, but this one, if you want to do a partial wrap on a vehicle graphics, loves it. The adhesive is repositionable, clean removing, does a beautiful job. If you want to do a floor graphic, you want to do an interior wall graphic, or general signage, almost every general signage substrate, 4600 GLX will adhere to it. And you know, if you want to weed it, it weeds really nicely. Not all films weed well when they're air egress. 4600 GLX does. So almost anything that, you know, a customer comes in and says, hey, I want this, 4600 will do it. Does it have limitations? Sure. It's a calendered film. We talked about the calendering process. So that means that there's some inherent tension in the film. If you're going to try to wrap an entire vehicle, this isn't film for that. But partial wraps, and by the way, partial wraps are far more profitable than full wraps all day long, every single time. And when a customer comes in and says, hey, I want to do something really cool on my vehicle, a lot of sign shops, unfortunately, they to the conclusion that we should full wrap this because that's the whole car taking on this image, not thinking about what it's going to take out of that sign shop to do a full wrap. There's a lot of cost that goes into putting a full wrap together, and they're typically not as profitable as doing a partial wrap. You can knock 2 partial wraps out in a day, often. And the revenue stream's much better, and also the equipment usage and all of that's much lower, so you can also be more productive throughout your shop. So 4600 guides you to that type of a wrap, but almost any other kind of signage that someone would walk in the door and ask for.
You know, I just want to take a second to tell you that this podcast was created for education and to affect your bottom line. The only thing I ask in return is you share it, you like us, you comment on it, give us some feedback and tell us that we're doing a good job. That really helps make this podcast grow a little bit. So if you can do your end, we'll keep bringing you more information, a lot more knowledge. Now, I'm gonna go off on a tangent here, but you've opened this door. So if you do a partial wrap on a vehicle, what does that edge look like when you go to wash the car and the sponge runs over that edge on a partial wrap? Is that be a fear that I would have that you're going to peel that over time?
That's an excellent question. If you think about just you know, almost any truck or trailer out there that just has text, there's what we call a very high edge to area ratio. And our adhesives are built to overcome that. So a partial wrap has what we would call a low edge to area ratio. In other words, you're still putting a pretty large image of, I don't know, it's somebody's flower shop. So you've got their flowers on there. It's a pretty big area and there's not a lot of edge. But when you start cutting letters, there's a lot of edge, which of course, as you just mentioned, they are more, there's a bit more risk in those areas, but people put cut graphics on their vehicles all the time. So a partial wrap, what it does is it takes the film and it, you don't wrap a bumper. You're not going to maybe wrap door handles. You aren't going to wrap all the way to the bottom of the vehicle, like having to go inside wheel wells, things like that, because it's a partial wrap. So in fact, you're actually mitigating risk by doing a partial wrap as opposed to a full wrap.
That makes sense. Never even thought about it in that ways. So you talked about walls, you talked about flooring. Now, for me, I always thought it was a different type of product that could hold the pigment of a digital print when you put it on the floor. Because when you put it on the floor, people are going to step on, they're going to smudge it, they're going to grind it in as they keep walking. And you're saying the 4600 has the ability to hold that pigment into that digital print and have a good walking surface without it smudging the print.
Yes, so there's a couple of things at play here. So our PVC films, as long as this is DPF, and I have to say about, and before we did this podcast, I should have researched this to give you an exact number, but I'm just going to say it's in the high 90%.
Okay.
Of the films we make that have DPF in front of them, digital print films, are printable on all platforms. And what that means is that you're able to get really good ink adhesion whether it's a UV print, solvent print, latex, or there are other types of new platforms that are coming out now. I don't want to go through them all, but ink adhesion to our PVC is number one for us. However, if you go on a floor, it's super important that you put a laminate on top.
Okay.
And actually, every digital you make for any kind of longevity, whether it's on the side of a vehicle, on a floor, wall, whatever, it should be laminated. And laminates can make a massive difference because, for example, they gave you 3210. Well, 3210 is actually a cast laminate. You say, well, why would I put that with a calendered product? So if a customer comes to you and says, hey, listen, I've been doing my vehicles for a while, but I'm outbidding because you know what? This quarter, we have to be careful of cost. If you use 4600 calendered film, it's going to be a little bit lower cost. But the customer says, I'm used to having a 7-year application because I usually get it done with cast. Just by putting a cast laminate on top will stabilize the calendered film below. Think about a little pond out there with ice. Right now, and where I'm at here in Canada, there's lots of that. And if you go and walk across it, though, you don't fall through, of course, if there's 3 inches of ice or so, because the surface being stable makes the hole more stable for what's happening on the surface of that substrate, which would be water. If you put a cast laminate on top of a calendered film, it stabilizes what's below it. Because actually the cast laminate is what is taking all of the environment and everything that's happening to that graphic. So speaking about floors, same thing. If you're going to put graphics on a floor, you have to have them laminated. And actually, we have 2 laminates, not the 3210.
Okay.
It's actually 3420, both gloss and matte. And we also have cast ones as well that are anti-slip. So you want to be careful. You want to make sure you're using a laminate that has a UL code for anti-slip so that you don't have any responsibilities if people get water on it and slip and fall. So you have to laminate anything that goes on a floor.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. And good to know for the anti-slip. I knew about the laminate,
Yes.
didn't know about the anti-slip. So that's definitely one.
Super important.
The funny thing is, and every sign company is so different. For my sign company, it's mostly metal. We don't play in the digital realm and floor graphics nearly as much as some of the other companies. So floor graphics are, once a year, if that. And it's just not the world we live in. So to have an anti-slip functionality, that's pretty impressive and just logical on many levels there. One of the numbers I had.
But what you just said. Oh, sorry. No, I was just going to say, Aaron, what you just said sort of outlines, kind of tying it back to why this product, if I were to choose one, that one roll of film, even laminates too, though, like our 3420, people use it just every day normally, but we make a laminate like that that's also anti-slip. So you don't have to go and buy a specialty laminate to get it to be anti-slip. If you're buying our 3420, you would anyway. It's a calendered laminate, goes with 4600, but it's also anti-slip. So that's the beauty of having this roll of vinyl there, that you can just lower your inventories and get a lot of use cases out of one, kit, laminate and print media. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, it's fine. So, okay, so I have, a floor graphic that, marketing-wise, it's only going to be there a year and a half. Calendared, super happy. And then I have a bank who wants their, letters from a lettering for their bank and their hours on their door, and they don't want to touch it for 20 years. And then you have other marketing things that they're up for 4 or 5 years. The whole marketing plan is going to, swap over in about 5-6 years. They're going to swap over. What longevity range do you guys start to tell us, hey, you might want to switch from calendar to cast because the tension in that vinyl is going to start to give over time?
Yes, exactly. So we have 3 different, well, I guess actually 4 if I really put a fine point on it. So we have promotional grade films, which are monomeric, which just means literally that it's a less complicated molecule when we put the film together. So it's only going to last for 1 to 3 years. And then the next level would be this calendared range, which is 4600. We also have 4500, which is like a 5-year range product. 4600 is 7. Then you get into cast films, which are 7 to 10 years. But then there's something else on top of that, which are non-PVC films. So we have a laminate right now called 3310, and that will take you out even further. So you can have a printed graphic warranted for up to 10 years on the side of a vehicle. And this is a huge benefit for long range graphics. And then longer if it were, like you mentioned, if it was a bank saying, hey, I want something that's just going to be sitting on some glass. Well, if you laminate it with that, you can get even outside of 10 years from a graphic like that. So there are a few different steps from promotional, to getting that what we call extended life laminates. And typically extended life laminates also have another feature, which means that they are better with corrosion. So you're able to have a lot of like gasoline and things like that might come in contact with a laminate, and those laminates are more specialty for that as well. So a little more costly for sure, not a lot, but a little bit, but they'll get you even further than a cast film.
I never, when I did sales, I'd always just say, your longevity, this sign's going to last you a long time. You're not going to have to replace it. But in the grand scheme of things, the older I got, of course, older equals a little wiser there. And as you get a little wiser, you might want to start having these conversations with your client of, how long do you plan on having this up before you plan on changing your marketing? I know the knee-jerk reaction is going to say, oh, forever. But we all know that's a lie. That's not the truth. The truth is you're going to change your marketing up every 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. And most signs that you build aren't going to need to go to 10 years because the marketing is going to change. If you saw a sign that's been up for over 10 years, that's a stale marketing plan, and they have bigger problems at hand. So I never thought about this until you and I have been talking, that you really have to have an open conversation of how long do you want this sign to last, and then that's the price point I can give you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And, today with social media being almost, changes in marketing messages happen weekly or monthly, certainly a graphic is not often, unless it's like long haul trucks and things like that, aren't going to be the same for 10 years. And a lot of times, if a customer wants that, what they're really saying is, hey, for the first 5, I want no change. I want this to look absolutely glossy, absolutely perfect. I want to make sure that every time I put it through a car wash, it comes out looking absolutely brand new and perfect. So sometimes it's not even thinking of the 10-year, but it's saying that, in the 5 years, there'll be no wear and tear basically on it at all. But you're right, having that conversation with the customer, expectations, so important, because again, how many times have people, and listen, I want to sell as much cast film as I can, of course, but how many times have we wrapped a vehicle, partial wrapped it in a cast film, when you could have done it with something like 4600, been more profitable?
Yeah, no, it's really true.
It's a good conversation.
Because, in 2-3 years, they're going to want to change it anyway. We could have had more money in our pocket. They're just as happy. We're not even getting close to the longevity terms, and then away you go. So really good food for thought on that one. I'm going to, another thought I had, and I want you to explain this to me. I want to say, this might be a legacy thing and not something we handle these days, but I've seen vinyls 4 or 5 years ago where they go up, and then after about a year or two in the UV light, it looks like someone started to take a blowtorch to them, and they get darker and darker and darker, and then by like year 4 or 5, it's just black, and you can't even see what that digital print used to be. What's going on there? What's happening?
So that's a breakdown, not in the print media, and not in the ink necessarily, but in the laminate. And this is why choosing a company who you can trust their laminates is super important. So sometimes, and it can be environmental as well. I've seen, trucks that same lot number and everything that, someone else bought, and they're absolutely perfect. And why is this truck different? And it turns out that they park it beside a rail yard, and there's a lot of graphite coming off the brakes of the trains, and it's rusting, and when sun hits graphite, it starts to boil the vinyl. It just starts to burn, because graphite, of course, will collect heat. And so you have a film that doesn't last as long as it should, but then it could be environmental. So that's one thing. You always have to look at the environment and see if there are any sort of outside forces, let's call it, that could be making this happen. But typically what's happening is that the UV inhibitors that are in the laminates are being burned up, or didn't exist, or weren't there in the right ratio, so they aren't protecting the film. And if you don't have good UV protection, PVC will break down very quickly. So you have to have that. That's a very important part of building the right laminate. But it's not so much the film underneath or the ink. Ink actually doesn't really last very long on its own in the sun. It really doesn't. If you use print something and don't laminate it, or don't have any kind of clear coat on top of it, and you put it out in the sun, you're going to get a couple of years, but you're starting to see reds and yellows disappear pretty quickly.
Gotcha.
You'll have a very bluish looking image. But if it goes black, if that's what's happening, then literally the laminate itself is cooking in the sun, and it has nothing in it to stop itself. And that's typically when somebody makes a mistake, like puts a promotional laminate out there and says, you know what, it'll probably be okay.
Well, that explains a lot on how it went black, and it really was a bad laminate that went onto it. And I didn't really know how much inks last, but you're telling me the inks just don't have a good lifespan in the UV world, so you got to protect them. You know, and it's pretty much like putting sunscreen on our bodies. You toss my butt outside for 8 hours, I'm going to look like a lobster as well. You know, so I get that one. The 4600, the can do all if you were, you know, a small shop and you got to have one vinyl on the rack. How does it handle rivets and stuff of that nature? Because I know for us, when we wrap the box trucks, the rivets end up being a real pain in the butt.
Yeah, rivets are always a little extra added fun. And 4600 will do fine with rivets. You just have to manage the customer's expectations. And here's why. Even if you take cast film and you go on top of rivets with it, after a couple of years of that vehicle going down the road and, you know, the panels popping back and forth, just moving in and out with the movement of the vehicle, vinyl is going to start to lift ever so slightly around the rivets. Now, with a calendered film like 4600, that's going to happen. It's going to be a little bit more. So it will lift a little. But this is also one of the reasons that I was mentioning putting a cast laminate on top. So if you want to make, let's say, a simple wall graphic, you're going to use a calendered film, 4600, and you're going to put a calendered laminate, 3420. Perfect. If you're going to put 4600 on the rivets of a box truck, it's a great idea to buy 3210, which is what we sent you, which is a cast over laminate, a little thinner, 1.3 mil, so it's not as heavy as a 2 mil, but that gives you the stability. It stabilizes the film, so when you shape it around the rivet, the cast laminate actually is the one that says, nah, I'm not moving. And then the forces in the film beneath are being held by adhesive, of course, and now that you have forces on both sides, it'll stop the calendered film from lifting around the rivets. I'm never going to say it won't lift at all, but cast films lift a little bit as well. So that's how you get away with using a calendered film, because that's the rule you have in your shop. If you want to do rivets or something like that, put some cast laminate on it. And by the way, the 3210 is a lower cost cast laminate because it's thinner. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons why it's a lower cost. I'm with you on that one. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I learned a lot more than I thought I was going to learn. I'm going to tell you that one right now. There's a lot that goes into it. And that's one of the things that, you know, I always felt that we had a void in the signage industry is we don't get this type of knowledge. We don't get this type of understanding when the rep shows up and says, hey, we have this new product and it's here. And I always want to say, why did they do it? Why did Arlon build it this way? Why did they build the laminate this way? There was a thought process behind it. You know, they didn't sit there going, let's try and build this and, you know, throw it off into the market. There was a thought process behind it. It's enlightening to know that thought process behind it. You know, that's what I really, really like about this. So you guys are on the cutting edge of technology. You guys are always moving forward on this one. The digital prints are making you guys move in different worlds and all that fun stuff. What else is also next on Arlon's plate here? What are you guys up to these days?
Well, you know, the newest thing in my world, because my position is with the Technical Solutions Group. I'm the director of the North American Technical Solutions Group at Arlon. And we saw something that was missing. You just mentioned it, actually, Aaron. You know, it's good for a shop owner to understand the difference between cast and calendar film, sure. But it's super important for the installers to understand it, because they're the ones putting it on. They need to know why the film does what it does, so that when they add heat and when they stretch the film and they fit it into the right spot it needs to go, they know how the film will react based on how it's made. So we see a void right now in the industry for intermediate level training. And this year we have launched something new. It's called Master the Wrap Initiative. And we call it Master the Wrap because right now the program that we're offering is for commercial vans only, but we will be extending that into architectural windows, walls, floors. We also, actually the next one we're planning to do is just trucks. So it'll be everything to do with rivets, back doors of trucks, the different types of corrugations and all of that. So we're looking, but most training programs, you watch an instructor and then you brush up on what you already know or what other concepts that you know, because you don't really get the opportunity to really wrap something or to do drills. And so we've changed the way that we're training with this program. You come, you work with us for 3 days, and all you do is work on van graphics, deep channels, how to trim properly, all of the details that go into that. But we drill you on it. So when you walk up to learn this really neat new concept, possibly, or even something that you've done yourself and you have your own way of doing it, we're going to make sure that before you leave, you've done this to the point of muscle memory, so that when you walk away, you have that skill. So it's a very different take on, so the curriculum was much more in depth to build, and figuring out what size of graphics and how to keep one graphic moving throughout the entire training so that you continue to work with your work to completion. So we're super excited about that, and we have 4 different locations across the US where we're doing these. So if you go to masterthewrap.com, you would be able to sign up for these trainings. And so they're all over the US, on all 4 corners.
Masterthewrap.com. I'll make sure to put that in the show notes so everybody can get their hands on that. So you got 4 locations. I'm guessing they're strategically placed all over the US so they don't have to travel too far.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like
so
that.
That's the newest thing. Mm-hmm. That's the newest thing with us, Aaron. And actually, we're always, our motto, if you want to call it our mission statement that's not official, is to be your partner of choice. Mm-hmm. And I think to be a true partner, you have to be willing to get down in the mud, and you're going to need to do training. You're also going to have to be there to answer questions. When people are writing into my team all the time, hey, what happened with my film? Sometimes it's on the substrate. Sometimes it's on the installer, sometimes it's on us, but we always explain it in depth. We get right into it, make sure without a doubt that we have a solution at the end. And we don't call ourselves technical service, it's technical solutions. It's all about finding solutions so that companies can be profitable, always moving in a forward direction.
Technical solutions, I like that. I like to play on words to tell them that, hey, there's an answer coming. Something positive is going to come from this. I like that. I like to play on words. It's a good mindset there. Positivity is going to get it through. It was funny when I was being trained on vinyl and how to weed and whatnot, they always said that vinyl can sense fear. And they said, just go at it and do it. And he goes, if you start second-guessing yourself, it's going to stick on everything. You're going to screw it all up. So it senses fear. Ritchie, really want to say thank you for coming on board and talking us through all this and talking us more about the 4600. My takeaway is look for the X at all times. That's going to save me a lot of headache on the air bubbles there. And just knowing the difference between Calendered and cast and, what you guys offered there. And I agree with you. If you have a good Calendered vinyl and then you do a cast laminate over it, you're going to get the same properties on the cast and keep a little bit more money in your pocket. So that's a good takeaway on that one. But thank you. Excellent. Thank you. I appreciate you coming on. And I have a feeling that we've just scratched the surface on laminates and other things. You and I might have to talk again, my friend.
Well, I hope so. And I sure appreciate you inviting me to be a guest. And it was a real pleasure. It was a lot of fun. Actually, reminiscing and thinking a little bit about my own journey as well as we've gone through this podcast. It sure has been a lot of fun. And I really look forward to future ones for sure.
Sounds good. Well, that's going to take up for the AC Method here. Thank you guys all for your time. Appreciate it. Next week, I'll let you figure that out next Thursday, what's going to happen next week. But it's going to be a good one. Thank you, guys.